We're going to kick things off with Limelight Networks. As we all know, live streaming came back in full force during the second half of 2020, and this year it looks set to eclipse all previous records. That brings a lot of opportunity, but a lot of choices and challenges as well. So what choices do content owners have to reach their audiences at scale and at reasonable cost points that make economic sense, but that don't compromise user experience? And of course, one of the key elements of user experience is latency. So we're going to talk with Limelight's Neil Glazebrook and Videon's Todd Erdley about the latency challenge. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
So talk to me about latency and why it's so important for live streaming, why it's not a one-fits-all proposition. I mean, it would be nice, wouldn't it, if we could just keep it simple and provide every end user in every situation with the same latency, but that doesn't make sense for a number of reasons, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit maybe in your introduction about economics, but let's just back up a bit. And I'm certainly not going to take credit for this sort of notion of the latency spectrum. You know, I think our friends at Wowzer and Mux have done a really good job at describing, the overall, latency choices that we as, technology companies, deliver these experiences to end customers. And, I kind of look at this latency spectrum, at one extreme, we have the standard, chunk delivery formats that we've known and loved, probably for a decade now, HLS and Dash. And we've come to expect what we would call hand waving latency. So that's sort of the elapsed time between somebody standing behind a camera and waving a hand to somebody at the other end, the consumption device, the video playback device, being able to see that same action. So we've come to accept latencies of around 45 seconds to a minute on those traditional streaming formats. And it works great. We've spoken about streaming events to tens of thousands, millions of audiences. And then at the other extreme, over recent years, we've seen near real-time streaming latencies, less than a second, with the technologies like WebRTC. And then we've seen kind of in the middle a reference point of broadcast, which would be, digital DVB or cable. And that hand waving latency is anywhere between sort of 5 to 8 seconds. So I think what we're seeing in the latter half of 2020 and what we will see through 2021 is adaptations and enhancements of our streaming technologies to kind of align with broadcast, so that we can synchronize the experience for second screen, for example, for live events. We allow interactivity with social media, so on and so forth. So yeah, it would be great to give everybody a 1 second or less than 1 second latency experience. I think there's probably consequences to that. But one of the big ones, of course, is the economics. So I think we're looking at trying to optimize around that midpoint. Todd, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, I have to agree. Let's blame it on broadcast. Let's blame it on social. And I think that Neil captured it perfectly, because broadcast becomes that gold standard, that 5 seconds. And then, things like this, I'm watching TV and then I'm going to be sending text messages to people about what I'm watching. And then they're going to consume it on a second screen device, and Neil's watching it as broadcast. And all of a sudden we're out of sync. And those are just experiences that have got to go away. And so we need to really look at live streaming no longer as a second-class citizen, but as a first-class citizen. And I think that the industry, be it in HTTP, be it in SRT, be it in WebRTC, be it in even slice-based encoding, I think that we're really progressing things really well to drive that performance to be at a first-class experience.
Right. I mean, we've all had that experience, or many of us have, of sitting, I always think about watching a football game. I'm watching it on Hulu, for instance. My brother-in-law and my son are in different locations watching on broadcast. we're all texting each other and have no idea what we're talking about. So, while we may never overcome all of that latency and that asynchronous behavior, certainly it's good to know that there are companies like Limelight and Videon out there working on it. So what are some of the challenges in the video workflow associated with delivering low latency streaming?
Well, I look at this like a supply chain, and it starts at the camera and it ends at the consumer. So what are the things that we've done as an industry in that supply chain, in that very well-behaved supply chain that Neil describes, that have led to the experience that we have? Well, God love Adobe, right? So RTMP and then rely on the cloud to generate all that HLS and dash and multiple bit rates and what have you. Well, that takes time, and HLS takes time, and all these things take time. So as you start to look at this, and you look at the sizzle reel that Limelight showed at the head of this whole thing, and the move of cloud to edge and edge processing starting to become very, very critical. What are those elements that otherwise sat in cloud that can start to go into the edge? And how can we start to rethink that supply chain? And how can we start to rethink about whether we're really an RTMP world or we're just going to be native HLS dash, and whether we're going to do push things or we're going to do pull things, and how do we reconsider this? And I think it's a time for us as technologists, as companies that are coming together to try to fulfill what the consumer wants, that we have to rethink this and put away some of the old standards. So I think it's one of the most exciting and transformative times in live streaming that we could possibly have. And I think that there are a lot of great solutions that are starting to come down that are changing those workflows.
Yeah, I think just to add a couple of sentences to that, from our perspective, we want to try and make this as simple as possible. We want to allow innovation around consumer experiences. We want publishers of content to be able to get it out there simply, cost effectively, and deliver, the best possible experiences. And we're all sort of technologists, and we're involved in, reading various specifications, interpretations thereof, and devising workflows. But at the end of the day, we're about delivering experiences, all of us. So that's really what I'm focused on. So it's just trying to make that as simple as possible, and opening it up to a broader customer base as possible.
Todd, you mentioned Adobe. And of course, anytime you mention Adobe, at least if you're talking video streaming, we think about Flash and RTMP. And we've all been hearing about the demise of Flash and RTMP for quite a while, but many applications still use it. Many end users have not necessarily followed those little pop-up messages on our screens telling us to uninstall it or stop using it. So is it really going away, and what's going to replace it when it does?
Sorry, I got a pop-up. I'll be right back. I have to close my Adobe Flash pop-up. But in all seriousness, it's a great technology. And you know what? RTMP can be part of the solution for low latency delivery if handled properly. But I'll go back to my supply chain axiom. When you really, really think about it, when we double encode, when we really do this double encoding, and we start to add time and cost and all sorts of things to the delivery of the video, that becomes something that we really need to move away from. And so I think that one of the transformative things as far as the intersection between cloud and edge, cloud and prem, and camera to ultimate delivery is, where does RTMP have a place and where does RTMP not have a place? And I think as we really concentrate on HTTP-based streaming, I think that we need to think about RTMP going away into a different world. It has a place, don't get me wrong, but I think that we need to be much more dedicated to what are the formats that we all want as end delivery points, and how do we start that process becoming very simple by giving that format at the head end of the whole process. So these are the transformative things that I think really start to make RTMP go away in certain situations.
Yeah, very quickly, as I know we've got limited time, Eric, but we still have an RTMP service. We're probably one of the few global CDNs that still offer it. There's cost and overhead associated to keeping that infrastructure going, with software that's out of you know, it's tough to keep going and fix bugs and so on and so forth. But so we're balancing that with customers that still rely on the technology to support their services, whether they're, you know, gaming, gambling organization, you know, whether they're doing video conferencing related services. So our goal is to offer those customers migration to a technology that's going to enable them to provide their customers a better experience at an economics that are better. So, you know, it's a little bit of carrot and stick, but, you know, that's our plan through 2021.
Sure. And also, as Todd mentioned, you know, a big part of that solution is edge compute and cloud compute. How is it changing the landscape for streaming, and what innovations do you see coming on the horizon that are going to improve every aspect of streaming, but especially latency?
Yeah, well, we're already rolling out, or we have launched our real-time streaming product based on WebRTC. That's running on Limelight Edge Compute. So, you know, from the get-go, you know, we realized that you know, we'd have to use our own edge compute. We have elasticity. We can spin up. It's a container-based solution, so we can spin up nodes where and when we need them, and we have to do that for economics. We need the elasticity, you know, of compute and bandwidth, but also, you know, we're also looking at edge to be able to add, if you will, overlay features like statistics, like interactivity. So I think they're going to become more and more important on a global scale, and trying to backhaul all of that into a central cloud is going to become more and more challenging from a technical and commercial perspective.
I think that Neil nails it. And I think that, you know, the question is, where does the edge end? And what we're doing is we're saying there are things that are happening in cloud, there are things that are happening in edge, and then how do you take it all the way where the edge is actually on-prem at the video source itself? And what are the things that we can do as a encoder company to create a holistic flow of information where we close the loop between cloud and edge and prem, so that there's now a dynamic interchange between all of those elements. So now we move this information with a much more seamless modality. What are unique things that can be done as far as AI ML as you're actually doing the video encoding, where you're producing rich metadata? I think that what's really going to happen with the edge is we're going to be talking less about the delivery of the video and more about the delivery of the quality of the information surrounding the video. So that, to me, is the transformative thing that's going to happen as cloud, CDN, encoder companies, as we all start to work together and move cloud to edge.
We've got a few minutes left in our conversation, and what I'd like to ask you to do is move away from talking about what you're doing to what your customers are doing. What's happening on the market? You know, is low latency really top of mind for customers, and what sort of low latency applications are your customers delivering now?
Go for it, Neil. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You go first, Todd.
Okay, so sorry. Thanks so much. You're very kind. So, you know, what we're really seeing is it really transcends a couple of different points. Everything associated with COVID has moved a lot of entertainment-based things and interactive things. We're just going to use fitness. Fitness has become really super important as far as low latency workflows. Medicine has become super important as far as low latency workflows. But the other thing that we're seeing that's really interesting as far as low latency workflow is group movie nights, where we're trying to deliver VOD content, which doesn't make sense because it's not low latency. But if I'm going to deliver VOD content to multiple different people, I better do that in a very seamless way where everybody's connected, because now they're at remote points. So that's the one that's been really interesting to us, delivering VOD in a movie night.
Yeah, so Todd, you covered many of the use cases that we're seeing, but you know, there's kind of ones that I hadn't really thought about, and that's some sports events. So sport teams, you know, competitions that are no longer have judges at the actual event now are streaming those, you know, across regions, across the globe, and judges in real time, you know, are you know, looking at those events and giving feedback and scoring. And it's kind of interesting how that can still continue in you know, in the absence of actually running that thing where everybody's together. So yeah, I think we're starting to see that, as well as, you know, gaming, gambling, the usual things that people talk about with real-time streaming. But yeah, there's plenty of activity, and I think 2021 is going to be a really exciting year.
Absolutely. Interesting stuff. And that does, unfortunately, bring us to a close. We do have one question in the Q&A, and funnily enough, it's about standards. And before we got on today, we talked about, well, should we talk about standards? Should we not? And then we decided that was a can of worms that could not possibly be covered in 15 minutes. So it is something that we talk about a lot at Streaming Media. I know that Neil and Todd both talk about it a lot as well. So it's always on everybody's mind. Sorry we didn't have time to get to it today, but thank you, Neil, and thank you, Todd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.